Hello, and welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. In each episode, we use a place as a jumping off point for a conversation about music, anywhere from the obvious to the obscure.
Welcome to Music Maps, the Rock and Roll Book Club podcast. I'm Mark Hart, and as usual, I'm joined by Simon Cardwell.
Hello, Mark.
Our Music Maps guest today is a returnee, Lesley-Ann Jones.
Second person to return so far.
Lesley-Ann is a writer, broadcaster, and journalist, having worked for more than 20 years in Fleet Street. Lesley-Ann even has written many music books and biographies of rock stars such as Mark Bolan, Freddie Mercury, and Paul McCartney. Today, we're here to talk to her about her friend and subject of her latest book, Songbird, an intimate biography of Christine McVie. Lesley-Ann, it's good to see you again. Welcome to Music Maps.
Thank you very much. It's good to be back.
When did you first cross paths with Christine?
That would have been 1984, January 1984. I was working for a British newspaper and I was based in Los Angeles, and she and the rest of Fleetwood Mac were living there at the time. And it was at not a New Year's Eve party, but a New Year party, January. And she was there, I was there. It was that era when British expats gravitated towards each other and hung out, because that's what we did. Nowadays, people tend to avoid other Brits. If you find Brits abroad, oh no, why should I be friends with you just because we come from the same place? But back then it was the opposite. And we just got chatting, and she had a very dark sense of humour like me. And we were making fun of the same things, I suppose, and speaking the same language. We really touched base on Dennis Wilson, the Beach Boys drummer, who drowned shortly before then, actually, 3 days after Christmas in 1983. Fall off the side of a boat and never came up for air. And he'd been her fiancé. And I'd had dinner with him, with Roger Scott, late of Capital Radio and BBC Radio 1, because we were doing an interview with him. So we'd had dinner with Dennis 3 weeks before he died. And Christine hadn't seen him for a while. So we got into a conversation about Dennis, who was a mad hellraiser, but he was the love of her life.
You actually discussed a book idea with Christine herself back in the late 90s, we understand. Why didn't that come together?
We talked about it when we were still in California. And then in 1990, she bought a house in Kent, in a tiny village called Wickham Brew, which coincidentally I knew very well and still know very well, because my grandmother used to live in Margate in Kent. And my grandmother used to take us for Sunday lunch to a pub in Wickham Brew, which is still there, where Christine would quite often go, most days in fact, to have lunch or dinner by herself. And she bought the manor house on the edge of Wickham Brew, called the Quaves, which is a glorious, beautiful manor with paddocks and an estate.
Yeah.
And you know what happens. You buy a place like that, you spend the...
No, I don't. Sorry, just to...
Okay, nor do I, really. But you spend the next 8 years renovating it and wish you hadn't bought it, because the job is far bigger than you anticipated.
A money pit.
And that's what happened. But she wasn't that happy there, to be honest. She did live in the house 17 years, from 98 when it was finished. But she'd taken the decision to quit music, to get away from that hell of a world, because it used her up and spat her out, really. And she wanted to just start again. When you first move out somewhere, I've had experience of this.
No one bothers coming to visit.
Well, they come at first, but then people are busy at weekends. No, we did discuss it, and she was kind of interested. But then when I went to see her at the house, the Quaves, and we sat down. It was a pass the marmalade moment, massive, great dining table, her at one end, me at the other.
I'm envisaging this. This is the trappings of rock star success.
Absolutely. And she really enjoyed her lavish wealth and her lifestyle, but not so much because she was lonely. We talked about it again, and she said, nothing to see here.
Okay.
I said, what, you changed your mind? And she said, yeah. Who's interested, really? She said, I'm not even interested in reading about my life, so why would anybody else be? So we left it. But then I read an interview with her shortly before she died in 22, and she was beginning to talk about doing a memoir again. So I thought, oh, good, maybe she'll call me and we'll pick up where we left off. But sadly, she then became very ill and didn't last much longer after that. So it was a book that was on the back burner for a long, long time.
So let's spin it back to the start. So Christine McVie, we know, is born Christine Perfect.
It's a good surname, isn't it?
Well, Anne Christine Perfect, to be precise.
Yeah.
Christine.
And they switched it around. But when she went to school, because her name was Anne Christine Perfect, and then they changed it to Christine Anne Perfect, the teachers called her pristine and perfect. And they would say to her things like, we hope you're going to live up to your name as perfect.
There are worse names, aren't there?
Yeah, there are, but she couldn't wait to get rid of it.
So Christine Perfect, later McVie, was born in the Lake District, but grew up in Smethwick in the West Midlands. So what do we know about her early life?
Her dad was a teacher, Cyril, and she was born in Cumbria in the Lake District, a place called Greenodd, simply because he'd been stationed there to run a school. And we know he was there, and it wasn't just a case of her mother, Beatrice, and little brother, John, who came before Christine, being evacuated during the war, because Christine was born in 1943.
Okay.
And a lot of children and expectant mothers were evacuated at that time. But we know he was there because he registered her birth. And so that's how I came to discover that he was working at a school there. Okay. But by the time she was 3, they were on the move. It was just after the war, and he got a job at a college, and so they moved to the Midlands.
Was there music in the house?
Loads of music because, well, first of all, Grandad had been an organist, and it's claimed that he was an organist at Westminster Abbey, but I could find nothing of him on the records. So he may have been a trainee, or he may have been a stand-in, but he wasn't officially a Westminster Abbey organist. But Dad also became, was a violinist from a very young age, also played piano, taught music as a profession. And her father was one of those unfulfilled musicians, had always longed to be a first violinist in a symphony orchestra, never actually made it. But he did play a lot in little string quartets and that kind of thing. So yes, there was a lot of music in the house, and her brother and she both had piano lessons.
What about her mum's paranormal activities? This caught me off guard reading this book.
Christine said once that all she'd ever longed for when she was a child was for an ordinary mother. And an ordinary mother she did not have. So Beatrice was a psychic, a faith healer, and a medium. She had a spirit guide, and she took people on ghost walks. So there were a lot of people in that house. And Christine was fully invested in all of that activity, by the way. She really believed it. But yes, it must have been distracting for her as a young girl.
So, born in 1943, she's the first cohort of teenagers. She's kind of the music explosion, rock and roll and all that stuff. She's immersed in that, and she plays piano. She's quite an accomplished pianist.
Yeah, she got to grade 7, actually.
But she also played bass, I understand, and develops an interest in the blues, which a lot of kids did around this time, although most of them, in my mind, are blokes.
People talk about very, very knowledgeably about the blues revival in the UK, which was being ignored completely in America, of course. It was very short-lived, but they were sort of all cranky old blues guys from before who were suddenly rediscovered and being brought over. Her discovery was Fats Domino, and this was just a bit of sheet music that pitched up in the piano stool that actually belonged to her brother. So she got this out and put it up on the piano and started playing it, and the pennies all dropped. Yeah. This was something that spoke to her misery and her struggle and brought her life, and from then on, it was the blues.
And she does meet around this Birmingham blues scene some people who go on to great prominence. Who might they be?
Oh, so Stan Webb, who was prominent for a while. Spencer Davis, who she had a fling with. She's at art school by this time.
Young Robert Plant as well.
Young Robert Plant, who got on the stage in one of the pubs she was at one night when he was about 15 and was given a little go. It was that sort of world. You've got
Black Sabbath too.
Black Sabbath, Slade came out of that part of the world. It's a lot of
very fertile area for music.
Musical crucible. Yeah. And if you're at art school, as we know, because virtually every other rock star we can think of went to art school, and that's where they start, because people who can play an instrument or who fancy they can sing gravitate towards each other, and they start getting up and playing for the rest of them. And then they join the circuit, and that's what she did, with no serious intention of ever being a professional musician.
She one of the only women on this circuit?
Yes, she was. But she didn't really consider herself as that. She didn't make a feature of that. As far as Chris was concerned, she was one of the guys.
So she joins Chicken Shack, Stan Webb's Chicken Shack subsequently. That's how I remember Chicken Shack from the music papers of the 80s. And one of the things they did, they went and, like many bands at the time, went to Hamburg and played in a Reeperbahn. And they did a 6-week stint, I believe. What did she tell you about those times?
So this is post Beatles, of course. You know, now when we think of the Star Club Hamburg and all those, the Kaiser Keller and all those other clubs, we think of the Beatles. They're pre-Beatles, really.
It's the second time this has cropped up on a podcast, though, and it was predominantly bands from the North and the Midlands that were being sent there.
Because it was an easy journey, and the promoters
unsigned bands.
Yeah, and
you'll get the experience. You'll get to play every night, and you'll come back
for next to no money, sleeping in an absolute flea fit.
If you're the Beatles, all that work will mean you'll come back the best band in the world. But obviously, there's many bands going.
The vast majority you'll never hear from again.
Yeah.
But also, it was not, let's say, a place for women.
No.
Which made it much more interesting to Christine because she.
So the audience is sailors and things, drunken sailors.
Drunken sailors. The only women in the place were really hookers, waitresses, and Christine McVie. I think Brenda Lee played there. I think at one time.
She did, yeah.
But you didn't get your Petula Clarks or your Sandy Shores in a place like that.
You kind of get a sense Brenda Lee could take on most sailors, actually.
For sure, yeah, 3 at a time.
So this is the mid to late 60s, and as we know, there's this British blues boom starting, and many of us know the bands who led that charge. John Mayall, of course, then you've got your Rod Stewart, so there's all these people, and even Robert Plant. But Chicken Shack are part of that, and are making some headway within that scene along the same time as Fleetwood Mac, of course.
Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
And of course, they pitch up at the Blues Festival at Windsor at the same time. In 67, this was. And they're both signed to Mike Vernon's Blue Horizon label, so using the same studios, moving in those same circles. And Christine had the massive hots for Peter Green. So she didn't hone in on John McVie at all. It just happened quite by accident.
So their biggest hit is this cover of I'd Rather Go Blind with vocals by Christine. How big was her role in Chicken Shack?
It was building, let's say that. You say it was their biggest hit, it was their only hit, to be honest. The first time you really had a sense of Christine having a voice that was a unique vocal. There was nobody else out there who sounded like her, and she was able to bring angst to that song, and that's, a miserable song needs an angst-ridden voice.
Because she won the Female Vocalist of the Year award.
Melody Maker's Readers' Poll. And
1959.
Also, they got to number 17 with that track. So Chicken Shack are like, wow, here we are, we're on a roll, we've got a career. And she's going, sorry, guys, I'm going to quit because I want to be a housewife and have some babies.
So she meets John McVie around this time?
She'd met him really at Windsor at the Blues Festival. And I think Peter Green actually pitched up on their wedding night as well at the hotel, which was all a bit strange.
So they got married in 1968?
Yes. Her mother died shortly afterwards. This is significant because Christine wanting to replace her mother by becoming a mother herself, all of that psychology.
So Christine leaves Chicken Shack in 1969. She has a brief solo career. Was she happy, or was she naturally more of a band member with not too much desire to be the front person?
As far as she was concerned, her music career that never really started was over. Because she's now a wife. She intended to be a mom, and she decided to withdraw, and she told Chicken Shack that she was quitting because she didn't want to do music anymore. She wanted to be a housewife, and then records and puts out a solo album, at which point Stan Webb and the rest of them get very cross.
Yeah, what's going on here?
So, and she does a tour. She does a sound there.
Oh, right.
With a re-recording of the big hits.
Exactly. So there's a lot of resentment at that time. The members of Fleetwood Mac then get themselves a commune in a big house down in Hampshire. And they all move in, and Christine's there doing the bulk of the cooking, the cleaning, painting walls, all this kind of stuff.
So this is Kiln House originally, is it?
This is Kiln House. And she did the artwork for that album cover as well, because she's obviously an artist. And then it would be, we need a bit of piano on this, or we could use a bit of extra backing vocals on that. Gradually, by stealth, she's drawn into Fleetwood Mac. And then they needed a keyboard player when they were about to go to America to do a tour. So really, she's no intention of becoming part of this lineup, particularly not the same lineup as her husband, because she said there's only one thing worse than a husband and wife being in a band each, and that's the husband and wife being in the same band.
Who else was in Fleetwood Mac at this point?
So you've got Mick Fleetwood on drums, John McVie on bass, Danny Cowan, Jeremy Spencer. Bob Weston isn't quite there yet.
Yes.
And Peter Green is on his way out because he's
Peter
having
Green's about to go.
a horrendous mental struggle at this point.
And of course, Jeremy Spencer ends up joining a cult.
Well, he does, but first of all, he's living in this commune with an underage schoolgirl, having babies with this girl. And nobody
It's a different time to today.
says or does anything about this.
How old is she?
14.
Okay, so very young, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Dodgy, you know.
Very.
So when they go to Los Angeles, Jeremy Spencer went missing and they sent out search parties. They went out themselves looking all over the place for him. And he's joined a religious cult, yeah.
And he never comes back. And he's in the cult for the rest of his life, I
Yes.
think. Yeah. He's
Well,
a
fair play.
card-carrying member.
But
yeah.
that-
Fair play for determination.
For sure, but that relationship broke up. So there are all these children.
Yeah.
I mean, the fallout is massive
Oh, wow.
of that. That's a whole kind of series in itself.
But it's his replacement, Bob Welsh, who kind of ends up introducing what many regard as this classic Fleetwood Mac sound by integrating the male and the female vocals.
It's very interesting that people say Fleetwood Mac as we think of the Rumours 5.
Yes.
That sound
That era.
only came about when Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham joined
yeah.
the band. But it existed already.
Yeah.
And it's all to do with harmonies and vocals.
It didn't
that
have
blend.
quite that magic mix it had then. It's there, yeah.
Chemistry wasn't perfected, but it was in the test tubes for sure.
Now, again, there's a lot of flux going on because another band member, Danny Kerwin, leaves. And this is when the band are actually much bigger in America than they are in the UK.
So they've gone to America for a few months and ended up staying 30 years almost. Ends up happening.
Yeah, well, yes and no, because there were some legal struggles, and at that time their management did something really weird, which was to put a fake Fleetwood Mac on the road to fulfill the obligation of the bookings, and there's a whole big legal struggle about that, and then the history is very dense and very convoluted.
The fake Fleetwood Mac are
Yes.
touring at this point. It's kind of a transitional period, I guess. But the arrival of Lindsey Buckingham Stevie Nicks is often credited, but you've said already that that's not quite the case. But Bob Weston and Bob Welsh both leave.
Well, you know the reason Bob Weston left was
We do. Our listeners might not.
Go on then.
It's whether you want to tell them.
Do you want to tell them or not?
Tell them. You can tell us afterwards if we cut this bit
well,
out.
so Bob Weston.
We did cut a libelous bit out of.
Did I say
test
something
2 weeks
libel?
No, but about
Oh.
2 weeks ago.
Okay. Bob Weston slept with Jenny Boyd, Mick Fleetwood's wife. And so, of course, the males,
One of many incestuous
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
manoeuvres.
the men
within
gang up and they
Fleetwood Mac.
eject him from the lineup. So then they've got no guitarist, so they have to find a new one. They're in California. And through a studio producer, Mick Fleetwood is put in touch with Lindsey Buckingham and hears his guitar playing and thinks it's exactly the right sound for Fleetwood Mac. He has a meeting with Lindsey, and Lindsey says, great, love to join, but I'll only come if my girlfriend can join too. But then there was all this panic about how can we have two women in the lineup? Shock horror.
So how did they get on?
Stevie and Christine.
Yeah,
There was a
Steve.
famous New Year's Eve dinner at a Chinese restaurant where the idea was that Christine would get the casting vote. If she didn't gel with Stevie, if they
Okay.
didn't get on, that Chris was allowed to say, I'm sorry, I don't think I can do this. Actually, they fell on each other like long lost friends. And from that point on, it was Christine and Stevie against the rest of the world. And Christine said, yes, she was very candid about this. Yes, I had jealous moments. Because she's the front woman. She's twirling about in the chiffon and getting all the attention. And I'm at the back, where I want to be, by the way, behind the piano, playing keys quietly.
So that
getting on
feeds
with
back to what we were talking
Yes,
before,
we're
the
talking
question
about
you
that.
asked.
So
Which was,
did the attention directed at Stevie Nicks actually suit Christine?
Very much
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
It's really interesting there, isn't it?
Yeah.
so the self-titled 1975 record, which is sometimes known as the White Album,
For all the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
yeah.
Wonder why? Yeah.
but it marks
Not a
a-
great idea to choose that.
Not really.
Shortened name.
But this is really a new beginning. Although it's the 10th Fleetwood Mac album,
Yes.
it's still the new beginning
And
because
having
we.
gone through so
I'd be
many,
interested to know how many people genuinely think that's their first album.
I'm sure
It's
a lot
kind of
them
sold
do.
as their debut album
But
a bit.
it was
isn't
successful as well.
Yeah.
But it was the debut album of that lineup, the
Yeah.
classic
Yeah.
Rumours lineup.
it?
Again,
It was a
it's-
huge success in the US.
but the UK
But
perhaps
not
is
so
a
much
little
in the
immune
UK.
to it.
Yeah, I think
Different
so.
tastes.
I think so. Because
Didn't even
we-
chart here.
No, we haven't got there yet. We haven't got to the point of what they became, which was a complete and utter mistake.
Well, we were perhaps still in the thrall of glam and ABBA. So, there's a crowded marketplace. I'm trying to be kind to the British record buyers of time.
Because was only a young thing, of course, in those days. So I didn't have that discerning interest in what was going on in the general music scene. But yes, we were following Mark Bolan and David Bowie and Slade. And this Anglo-American sort of, they were far too Eagles for us, I suppose. They were far too grown up and sophisticated.
And with the, it's the benefit of hindsight, isn't it? But when you look at that album, you look at the tracks that are on it, those people with just the tiniest knowledge of Fleetwood Mac will know at least a couple of these tracks, won't they? Yeah.
None of which touched any of us. I'm talking about my cohort, my age group. I can remember seeing the Rhiannon video on Top of the Pops, I think, years later, when it was revived, and then thinking, oh, this is good, but not realizing it was something old that had been dug up.
And then the following year, 1976, her marriage to John McVie comes to an end. Was this constantly touring and being around each other 24/7? Does that play a part in this?
Small part. It was mainly to do with John's drinking, and she couldn't stand it anymore. And it was just too much in the end. He wouldn't behave. He wouldn't stop drinking.
So now we're moving into 1977. For context, this is the year, of course, punk broke. Popular acts such as Bowie, Bob Marley, Donna Summer, The Jam, etc. put a big flag in the charts. But in February of that year, a record appears that becomes a sensation. Rumours. Tell us about the process the band went through. And you've just mentioned there's divorce here, there's all kinds of things. Tell us about the arduous process that somehow culminates in Rumours existing.
It's a funny thing because so many people think that that album was created as the divorce album and that it was designed to reflect the disintegration of those relationships within the band. And it wasn't. It just came about quite by accident. They just happened to be falling apart within their own personal relationships. And the songs that Christine and Stevie and Lindsey were bringing in as they evolved came to reflect the circumstances of their personal lives.
So there was no pre-planned.
No, it wasn't
theme.
a concept album. It was anything but a concept.
I think some people probably think it is, but
lots of people do. I get this all the time. Yeah. So Mick had Jenny. 4 months later, he was going to marry her again. But by the time he married her again, he was already having an affair with Stevie Nicks.
So they get divorced and remarry 4 months later.
But they have very small children, and I suppose it made sense. But, you know, in that rarefied world, everything seems like a good idea at the time. Lindsey and Stevie have called it a day, and John and Christine have broken down, but they have agreed to continue working together and that they can all be very grown up about it, which is fine until about 2:00 in the afternoon when John's on his third bottle and has lost his sense of reason and starts to become very obtuse and childish and spiteful and bitter and nitpicking. And then they would start arguing, and then that wouldn't stop for the rest of the night. Ken Kayat, who produced the album, said it was, obviously it's the most extraordinary thing to have worked on, but it was like getting blood out of a stone.
So it costs almost $1 million and takes the best part of a year. 10 of the 11 tracks become hit singles, which is pretty incredible. Was Christine comfortable with the level of fame that they're now operating in?
I think she's got used to it by now. And she's also doing a fair amount of drugs of her own, by the way, cocaine being her drug of choice. And they're into that groove of, you know what it was like in those days, album tour. Everything had to be done by going there and doing it. There was no technology, really. You had to travel to the furthest corners of the earth to deliver your music and so on. And that horrible routine that they existed in at that time. And the only people who really understand it are the people who were in it. And it's very destructive.
So the album's sold over 40 million to date.
And still selling, one of the biggest selling albums.
Consistent selling album, yeah. There's a lot of I meet a lot of younger people who are really into Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac.
I'm mother to 3 of them.
Yeah. So I was talking to someone in her early 30s yesterday, and she said, "Oh, they're my favourite band." So they have crossed over age groups, but one of the biggest hits is Christine's "Don't Stop," and some listeners aren't fully aware. They think Lindsey Buckingham sings this, but she sings the lead vocal too.
Yeah, she does. It's an interesting thing about that dynamic between Christine and Lindsey, because they always had that, and she called him the Lindsey genius, and she knew that he was always able to rescue a song, and their voices blended very well. It wasn't just a question of the two women in the band.
And they're the sort of foremost songwriters as well, I guess, within the band.
Absolutely.
Those two, yeah. So they become that too. But it's another Christine song, Songbird, which becomes the band's set-closing track, I think, for the rest of their career. What do we know about the writing of Songbird?
It's so interesting. When she was speaking about this, it would make your hair stand on end. She was asleep and something woke her up. And this whole song, she said, was delivered to her fully formed. And she could only think that her mother brought it from the other side because she had all the chords, she had the melody, she had the lyrics. And there was hardly anything she needed to change. But it came in the middle of the night. She didn't have a keyboard. She didn't have a recording device. She didn't have anything even to write anything down. So she had to hold this song in her head and go over and over and over it until she managed to get somewhere the next day where she could put it down. And when she took it into the studio, the rest of them stood there in silent amazement. They couldn't believe the song.
Was it easy to record?
No. They recorded it in an arena in California, actually. She was playing a piano in the middle of a stage. I remember they did some cute things, like they got some red roses and put them in a vase on top of the
The
piano.
Zellerbach Auditorium on the campus of the University of California.
The very one. And when they brought Chris to this place and made clear that this was how they were going to record it, she broke down in floods of tears because it was such an emotional experience.
Recorded on Robert Plant's mobile studio. Extensive touring follows this, all across the US. They come back home to England, plays this homecoming show of sorts, the Birmingham Odeon, April 2nd, 1977. Did Christine's family get along to come and see her when she comes back from the US?
Christine was very close to her dad, and she did drag him along to this. And of course, her mother having died, Cyril's remarried by this time to a younger woman. There were other members of the family there to witness the homecoming of the great Christine McVie, who's now a global
They're one of the
star.
biggest bands in the world by this point.
By far, yeah. Who would you align them with? The Eagles, I guess, you know. And then, of course, they come to London and they sell out 3 nights at the Rainbow Theatre, which I only ever went to once before it closed. David Bowie, I saw.
All my life, whenever I go to watch Arsenal, I get off at Finsbury Park, it's been a church for 20
It has
plus
been
years.
a church for all that time, yeah.
And I always look at it, and the friend I go with who edits this podcast, Andy Maxwell, hello Andy, we always talk about all the gigs and things that have gone on there. Pill played a gig there Christmas Day. The Beatles did their Christmas pantomime gigs
But
there.
long before our time.
Yeah, and so many other things. So
Yeah.
there's a
But
whole
what a temple of musical history.
history at the Rainbow. I think that's a podcast episode in itself.
If
at
not
some
a whole
point.
series, yeah.
Fleetwood Mac are one of the biggest bands in the world. They're touring arenas and stadiums all across the US. And she meets Beach Boy Dennis Wilson.
They were recording in a studio and Dennis Wilson wandered in and knew Mick Fleetwood, actually. And Mick Fleetwood introduced him to Christine. And of course, Chris is completely bowled over. He's a very good-looking guy, Dennis. But, you know, absolute hellraiser. He'd been married 4 times by then, got kids coming out of his ears. He's drunk, he's dissolute, and
He's got some issues. So.
quite a few, yeah. And, you know, classic female, Christine thinks she can fix him. But she said it was love at first sight, that she absolutely fell head over heels. And he's going through some difficulties in his life. There's a lot of drains on his purse, let's say. And Christine is currently one of the richest and most successful rock superstars on the planet. So from his point of view, was it love at first sight? I've never really seen that. But certainly from hers it was.
The Tusk album follows, October of 79. And the making of this record's famously troubled. Christine still contributes some of the best songs on the album.
So, Tusk, I mean, quite a controversial album this was, wasn't it? But you've got tracks on this album over and over. It's beautiful, actually. Think About Me.
Some of the best songs on it are hers, for sure.
Brown Eyes, Honey High. Her songwriting has really matured by this stage. I think at that point, though, they did know that they were never going to top Rumours.
In some ways, it's quite a smart choice to not try. But on the other hand, going down the new wave punk sort of influence, I think maybe being a double album, maybe if they just concentrated on a single album.
There were a lot of fallings out with the record company at this point.
But what do I know? You know,
But what do any of us know?
they've sold hundreds of millions of records and I've sold 0.
And it was fairly obvious to all concerned that there was never going to be another Rumours.
Around the period of Tusk and before, they become very well known for excess and black limousines, fleets of black limos and hotel rooms being completely redecorated specifically for them and all this kind of stuff. How did Christine feel? Was she one of the ringleaders of this or not?
She always said I was no angel. Whatever the rest of them were doing, I was doing.
So she joined in, yeah.
Yeah, although she was often referred to as the mother of the band and the glue that held the whole thing together, which I found was very true. She wasn't exactly spanking their bottoms and sending them to bed with no supper. You know, she was joining in.
Because apparently they were spending as much on champagne at some of these gigs as they were selling in tickets.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how there was any left. You know, but yes, they were. And they also have private jets and, you know, their own little sort of, there were the Lear jets and then there were the tiny jets as well to get them to the bigger jets. And
I think on this Tusk tour, they spent most of the revenue was just spent on limos and champagne and things like that.
yeah, you know, but they were making money. It wouldn't be like that now.
So the relationship with Dennis Wilson comes to an end 1981. Did he find his way into her songwriting?
Yeah, specifically, there's a wonderful song she wrote about Dennis called Only Over You. And it is a very moving song. She saw in the end that it was a lost cause, a hopeless case. And there is also the controversial, let's call it a meeting of minds, shall we, between Stevie Nicks and Dennis Wilson. I think he couldn't resist because that was Dennis and that's what Dennis did. And lots of people loved him dearly and to death, but he could not help himself when it came to women. And that was, I suppose that was an infidelity too far.
The Mirage album comes next. Did Stevie Nicks' solo career effectively end Fleetwood Mac?
Christine and Stevie left the band at about the same time because Stevie was doing so well as a solo artist. And I think much to Lindsey's chagrin as well, because he always saw Fleetwood Mac as a stepping stone to his own solo career. But Stevie was the star and did achieve massive things as a solo artist. And Chris was hell-bent on getting the hell out of it all at that stage and turning her back on music. Christine didn't want to be a solo artist. Well, she did record some stuff after that by herself and with her nephew, Dan Perfect. But she would make these albums, but then not want to go out and promote them.
Right.
And, you know, that doesn't work, does it?
So she leaves, she has this solo single hit success, and which gets to number 10 on the Billboard charts, and then there is a solo album. But skipping forward a few years, the next big Fleetwood Mac project becomes the Tango in the Night album, which comes out April 1987. Was this another difficult recording process?
I think nobody was surprised that this album took a year and a half to make because it's Fleetwood Mac being Fleetwood Mac.
Pretty typical of them, isn't it?
And it's success, excess all areas, and they've hardly played together for the past 4 years, all of that. Their personal lives take precedence. Everybody's angst-ridden and up against the wall.
Stevie Nicks can't join them till halfway through the...
You know, because she's on her solo mission, darlings, and all of that.
This album does give us two of Christine's biggest songs, the mammoth hits Everywhere and Little Lies.
So I think everybody knows these two songs because they've been used so much on advertising and TV themes and all
two of their best known songs.
Two of the best known Fleetwood Mac songs ever, Everywhere and Little Lies, which she has co-written with her new husband, a Portuguese keyboard player.
How big a role did he play?
Well, Eddie Quintela is his name. He was a younger man. She obviously married him on the rebound. She said by the time they got married, it was already on the skids. Later also said that giving him a co-credit on these songs was very generous of her. But they are magnificent songs.
Two of their best.
And this was a great thing about Chris's writing. She said, I write simple songs. They come very quickly. I write them very quickly. But the magic that they managed to work with the production of them and the blend of the voices and so on, the holy trio, if you like, is what makes them special, isn't it?
Yeah, we haven't really touched on her voice either. She's got this quite unique voice. It's very different to Stevie Nicks. And I think that's a part of Fleetwood Mac that I think a lot of people kind of undervalue a little bit, perhaps.
And I think, you know, it's been very interesting talking about Christine on many radio interviews that I've been doing for this book, which are mostly introduced with a Fleetwood Mac track that has Stevie Nicks' voice on. And I always say, actually, that's not Christine McVie. This is Stevie Nicks. But it doesn't matter because it's Fleetwood Mac, which means yet again Chris's voice is getting overlooked and not heard as loudly.
But she does sing some of their biggest songs.
She does sing some of their biggest songs.
I'd be interested to know how many people think that's Stevie Nicks singing.
Or even Lindsey Buckingham. But it is a unique vocal style, a completely natural, unforced sound, you know, without the trills, without the kind of extra bits.
I think when you hear Fleetwood Mac, the second she starts singing, I think she's instantly recognisable.
I do too, but a lot of people don't think that. No. It was interesting that she was naturally a soprano as well. but that she chose to sing as an alto. That's been pointed out. Again, this is what makes it unique. And a wonderful addition to those harmonies that we've come to know and love so well.
And, you know, there are some fans who have this down, Tango in the Night, as the genuine successor to Rumours. Are you one of those people?
Not really. No.
I have a friend, Ali, from my hometown, who swears that Tango in the Night is better than Rumours. And he's been saying this for a long, long time. He reiterated it to me this week on WhatsApp. So unpopular take, but there are people out there who think that from Rumours to here, so that 10-year period, this is when you get that proper...
If you gave me both
full
albums
album
right now and asked me to listen to them right this second and compare and contrast, I would always have to go for Rumours.
Yeah, I would too. But they're kind of, you know, in a similar vein, I guess, in some respects. Lindsey Buckingham does not participate in the tour. He backs out of doing that. There's a greatest hits album that comes, and the Behind the Mask album in 1990, which is without Lindsey. He's replaced by Rick Vito and Billy Burnett. So at the end of this period, she decides to leave Fleetwood Mac. What brings about her decision to call an end?
She's had enough. It's taken its toll. I think the Stevie and Dennis thing really got to her, and she couldn't handle that anymore. And it was just madness, and it was consuming them. And she said, if I don't escape now, I never will. She'd also developed an extreme fear of flying. She was aviophobic. And of course, touring in those days was all about getting on and off flights. She just couldn't do it anymore. She was terrified to get on another plane. So she got on one more plane back to the UK. And then that was pretty much it for nearly 16 years.
The next time we see the classic lineup of Fleetwood Mac is Bill Clinton's inauguration, January of 93, to play Christine's Don't Stop, which had been his election campaign theme. Did anyone actually think all five would actually agree to do it?
It was amazing that they asked them, given the circumstances of the band, and amazing that they said yes. But Christine's turned 50 by this time. And if you watch the video of that particular performance, she does look markedly different from how we'd last seen her as part of the Mac. But they did look happy to be there. And I suppose it's like that long-lost thing. You've fallen out with a sibling. You know, haven't seen the sibling for 10 years. And suddenly you're thrown back together for some big occasion. And there's a huge sigh of relief. Here we are. You know, this only works with the five of us and the blend of these voices and these personalities and our history. It may have been terrible, bloody history, but it was their history and it worked for them.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things happen. There's the MTV special that becomes the dance.
Yeah, and that is really good.
They go in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They do the Brit Awards, the Grammys, and all this other stuff. And the Grammys ends up being her final gig with the band, first at this point. How did the others take her decision to leave and move back to England?
I would imagine they were shell-shocked, but then if you looked back over the history of Fleetwood Mac, people came and went, didn't they? It was that kind of a band.
I think she's underappreciated more by the casual fan than by anyone within the band or anyone who really likes the band. I think she kind of goes under the radar a little bit.
Because she never promoted herself and she wasn't giving the interviews. It was mainly Stevie and Mick Fleetwood who gave the interviews when there was an album to promote or whatever else. Christine wasn't doing very much of that. So she was under the radar. She was low-key, to the point that a lot of fans who weren't in the thick of it, who weren't absorbing and consuming the band at a certain musical level, were probably unaware of her.
Did this move back to Kent work?
No, it didn't. You remove yourself to a village way out of a capital city and you build your castle and you expect them to come. They ain't coming. She was very lonely out there and she started drinking a lot again and taking codeine because she had a problem with her back. And it was at that point she realized she was separated from her people. She said, you know, people don't realize musicians are different from other people. People think that because we write songs about all the ills that affect everybody else in their normal day-to-day universal lives, that we have the answers. She said, we have fewer answers than anybody else. But she needed to be back among her people, bonkers people, eccentric people, people who spoke her language. So she moved back to London. And then shortly after that, she decided to return to Fleetwood Mac.
She appears on their final album, Say You Will, because there was a few bits she'd recorded before she left that end up on that record. So in 2013, she plays this gig in Hawaii with Fleetwood Mac. What?
So she'd had therapy for her aviophobia. As far as we know, she didn't have any psychotherapy, but she decided to take the bull by the horns and get herself sorted for this fear of flying. And she suddenly got the taste for traveling long distance to destinations that Fleetwood Mac had never played in. So she wanted to go to Africa and the Far East and all these kinds of places. And then Mick was in London. She said she might fly. He'd been inviting her for years, come out to my place in Hawaii, come and stay. And he happened to be in London and on the spur of the moment said, fly back with me. And she did. And Mick had a restaurant there, had a house band at this restaurant, and he would get up, obviously, and play drums. And he invited her up on stage and she went. And she said that was a massive penny drop moment as well, because she had the taste for it, for performing again, and she could still do it.
I think you were at a gig at the O2 that same year, where she again appeared unannounced.
That was a moment, because the rumor had been doing the rounds that she was going to come on. And the first night they played, everyone was abuzz with this. And
there was nothing.
Nothing. She didn't come on. So the second night I was there, I'd actually sailed down the Thames to the O2. That was with quaffing champagne.
It's fun getting a boat to the O2.
Sweet thing to do. And then everyone was being a bit bitter and cynical about the fact she hadn't performed the night before. And of course, that night she did come on. And it was the most incredible thing. It's I like...
Peter Green was there too.
Yes, he was.
The same night.
He was in the audience, but they didn't bring him up, which was a shame.
If you went to the first night, you got nothing.
Yeah,
you just
quite.
got the normal gig.
Yeah, but the audience didn't get Peter Green. That was the thing, which was a pity. But that must have whetted her appetite to think, well, yeah, I could do this. So when the following January they went into rehearsals in Ireland, unbeknown to the world, she was rehearsing with them, ready to go out on tour.
One of the last things she does as a member of on record is she does this album with Lindsey Buckingham, 2017. Just scanning forward to 2022, she does pass away in November of 2022. And while a close family are aware of her health, does the news catch others off guard?
Yeah, the band had no idea she was so ill. And Stevie especially was pouring out all this stuff on Twitter. The minute she heard, she got in touch with the Christine.
I think about 4 or 5 days before.
Yeah, and she wanted to come over and they said, no, don't, we just stay put for the minute. And before anything else could really be decided, Christine had very tragically died. She was 79 and she'd lived a life and she'd lived it to the hilt. In some ways, it's quite remarkable that she survived that long. And I think that's the way we have to look at it, really. She did have complicated health issues. She ended up having a stroke at the end. That was what killed her, really. But there were other things going on. But she had made peace with herself by the end. She was able to reconcile all the years of misery and not finding her other half, and saying that she realized that the whole quest had been futile, but not her entire life. So I was really glad that she'd had that peace by the end.
But there was never a public funeral or anything, any sort of thing to mark it that the public ever found?
No, and there quite often isn't with rock stars. I mean, if you think about it, John Lennon didn't have a funeral. David Bowie didn't have a funeral.
Yeah.
I'm all for private funerals, actually.
Yeah, I agree massively. So there we go. There's the life of Christine McVie. Thank you to Lesley-Ann for coming in and telling us all about this.
My pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Right, so, Mark, true or false, you decide, as usual. 3 questions. First question, this is quite a strange one. On their wedding night, Christine and John McVie got drunk with Keith Moon. Did that happen or not?
It did happen.
It did not. It was...
Is it somebody else?
Yeah. Do you want to have a guess?
Was it somebody who was in Fleetwood Mac? Is it Mick Fleetwood or something like that?
No, completely not in Fleetwood Mac. Oh, a solo artist of the late
Cliff
60s.
Cliff? Oh, not Cliff then.
Not Cliff, no. Cliff
Arthur
would never
Brown.
do that. Sadly not. Joe Cocker is the answer.
What would you do if I sang out of tune?
Turned out he was just in the same hotel as them on the wedding night. Which is pretty unlikely, isn't it? So which of the following did not play a gig at the rumoured to be haunted Smethwick Baths, close to where Christine McVie grew up? The Beatles, the Kinks, or Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac?
I reckon the Beatles didn't play there.
The Beatles did play there. November of 62, the Beatles were there in Smethwick, which is quite mad, but there we go.
They liked Bath, didn't they? They played Leighton Baths near where we are.
Yeah. In those days, there was loads of venues that were just baths, yeah. The Kinks were there February 65, along with The Who, The Stones, The Small Faces, but Fleetwood Mac never played there, so yeah. On a teenage visit to London, Christine McVie played an impromptu gig at the recently opened Marquee Club.
This is true.
It's false.
What?
She did play a gig, but at the Two Eyes Coffee Bar, which is even, in my opinion, even more impressive.
Birthplace of British rock and roll, isn't it? Tommy Steele, Cliff Richard, Christine McVie. How old was she then? She must have been about 7.
Teenager, came down to London and ended up playing a gig there, yeah.
When you came to London for the first time, where did you do your first gig?
I didn't do a gig. First trip to London, I was about 2 and I was in a pushchair. We went to London Zoo. At the end of each episode, we each recommend something you've liked for a long time or a recent discovery. I'm going to go first this time, Mark. Mick Fleetwood appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation. Have you ever heard of this? Season 2. The episode's called Manhunt.
Oh, Star Trek. Sorry, I was thinking Star Wars.
Star Trek.
Yeah,
Next Generation.
So that's not Jean-Luc Picard, is it? Is that the woman?
It is Jean-Luc Picard.
Oh, it is, okay. Make It So.
Make It So, that's the one. He appeared as an alien ambassador, foreign dignitary. Have you got anything to recommend, Mark?
Well, I'm watching The Studio, the new programme by Seth Rogen, sitcom on Apple TV, which is he's the boss of a studio in LA, where he wants to make art films, things like Annie Hall.
Right.
But he's forced to kind of not quite do the Marvel universe, but things that I don't know. He'd be made to do the Minecraft movie, shall we say?
We do have a recommendation from Lesley-Ann too that we recorded on the day, so here's that as well.
It's a funny thing for a writer to say, but I've got really back into words, unusual words. So I recently went to a charity fundraising lunch and discovered on the day that I was going to be sitting on the same table as Anne Hegarty from The Chase.
Okay.
And Sean Wallace was on the next table. So I'm big into The Chase, right? Because you learn things. And it's my little reward, The Chase. If I meet my word count on my writing days, which is 3,000 words, if I make 3,000 words, I'm allowed to watch The Chase. So I watch The Chase and I make sure I learn one thing. I have one takeaway thing every single day from this. And that justifies watching it. And so I see Anne Hegarty sitting at the table, and I went up to her and I said, "Hello, Anne. I've got one word for you." "Oh, what's that?" she said. And I said, "Po poto monstro sesqui pedaliophobia."
Sounds like a very long word.
It's one of the longest words in the English language, and it means a fear of long words.
Okay.
So now I've got back into words, so I'm trying to find...
You've done well to remember that.
So I've worked on that to commit it to memory.
We'd like to thank Lesley-Ann for being a fantastic guest once again, and remind people that Songbird, an intimate biography of Christine McVie by Lesley-Ann Jones, is available.
We always mention this, but it does make a difference. So every time we mention leaving reviews, we do get some more reviews. So if you'd be willing to leave a review, they're going up all the time. We've received some good reviews, Mark. Do you have any of these? Have you seen any that you were impressed by?
Well, I wanted to ask you a question because somebody, anonymous, other than they've called themselves a keen suggester, says, "Love this, 5 stars, very good. Great podcast. Enjoying going through every episode. Shame some of them can't be longer." Now, he says Funky Sigh could have been 3 hours. Now, that Funky Sigh was one that I missed because I was probably on holiday. Could you have spent another 2 hours with Funky Sigh?
Well, I do have another episode with him that has not yet come out. So I have a part 2 specifically about his time in the Fall. So that's been recorded, but I've just been saving it for some point but in the next couple of months that will be there. So we do have that.
Well, a keen suggester will like that because he says, "Keep up the great work, lads." Well, on that occasion, it was just you, wasn't it? Flying solo. So Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, keen suggester.
There we
What
go.
about you? What stuck out for you? Is there one that you've enjoyed? Is it the ones where they only mention you?
Not many of them do. I've got this one here that came on Apple last week. I've only just discovered this, but I love it. Great guests, interesting and well-researched questions, agreeable presenters. It's
Agreeable.
all there.
I'll settle for agreeable.
We have been described as agreeable, which I'm going to take that, Mark, because I've been called much worse in my time.
Indeed, I will too. And that's from Nigel B. Now, were you like me thinking, who's Nigel B? We must know a Nigel B. It could be Nigel. Is it Nigel Blackwell from Half Man, Half Biscuit?
Let's hope so.